Okay. Good evening, and welcome to the next in our series on technology safety. We've talked about a variety of issues, including behavior, education behavior, and we've been talking about actual technology. At this point, one really big area needs to be covered, and that is general security of your accounts and your devices. The two are not the same, but there is an overlap. Okay. And there really are a handful of technologies, a handful of items that should be in play here. So as I mentioned in the prior session, the first thing you need to do as far as your devices is concerned, you want to have the filters, you want to have a spam filter. You also should have a decent antivirus, anti-malware to block programs that can get into your computer. Now, a lot of people tend to think, why would anybody be interested in my computer and my account, etc.? And there are a lot of reasons. First of all, a lot of small thefts can add up very quickly. And if somebody has the right tools, they can hack your computer quite easily if you don't have some decent defenses in place. And it's true that you may not be able to mount an impregnable defense. You might not be able to set yourself up to a point where nobody could hack into your system, but for the most part, the money is in people who are easy to hack. So step number one is simply to understand that while you may not be able to prevent every single possible intrusion, if you make it just a little bit hard, every extra bit of difficulty that you put in the way of a hacker really improves your safety and your chances of being left alone. The other thing to keep in mind is that, if somebody empties your bank account or something like that, they don't know whether you have a lot of money or a little money, or, maybe it's the day after your payrolls, you and somebody else in your household, if you share an account, say, they don't know that stuff, right? So this could be attractive. The other thing to keep in mind, though, is that your account could be a stepping stone to other things. For instance, you may have heard the term botnet. What's a botnet? A botnet is a network of computers that do a certain thing, like attack a larger entity, whether for money, for other reasons, it doesn't matter. Most computers on a botnet are not doing something that their owners want them to do. The computers that are being used in the botnet have been hijacked. Okay, but you don't want to be in the middle of that. You don't want to be part of a botnet for a number of reasons. One of which is simply because if your computer is being used as part of a botnet, you're going to definitely be losing speed. You're going to be losing performance. If you have a metered connection, there's that. The other piece of it is that, say, if the botnet is used to go after, say, a hospital, and the hospital gets compromised, and the FBI goes looking into this, you're going to get investigated. Now, yes, you didn't do anything illegal, et cetera, but who needs it, right? So just, on a very basic level, that's, a problem. But the other thing is that your account, especially a work account, but even if not a work account, your account can be used as a stepping stone. And welcome to your account can be used as a stepping stone for getting into other accounts, to be stepping stone to a higher level of access. This is a very big issue. Like if you own a business, if you use your personal email for your work, etc. You know, it's such a common issue that there's even a name for it in the business. It's called an escalation of privilege. So I can do A, B, and C. There are other people who can do A, B, and C plus a few other things. So if they know how to use my account, then they can use these other hacks to escalate my privileges, as it's called, and enable me to do those other things that the other people can do. And before you turn around, you know, mayhem has broken loose. So it's really important to keep your device locked and your accounts locked as well. The other thing, again, another thing to keep in mind, there are many, you know, facets to this, but another thing to keep in mind is that information can be used against you. And I don't just mean in the sense that somebody finds out that you have this embarrassing thing going on in your life, and they will now use that to embarrass you, publicize it, etc., which in and of itself is a problem. And, you know, especially if it's somebody else's information that they happen to get based on the things that they, you know, your emails, etc. That's also a responsibility. If, say, you're emailing, you know, about sensitive information about somebody, you have a responsibility to try to keep that under, you know, discreet, etc. But beyond that, that can be used in other ways to, say, set up a phony credit card account, right? And they use that to set up your credit card, you know, credit card account in your name and spend thousands of dollars. And then you're stuck with the bill, and you might be stuck with the bill, or you might be able to prove that it wasn't you, but that can take time and money. You know, yes, it may be less expensive to go through, you know, clearing your name. But, you know, if you need $5,000 in lawyer's fees and hundreds of hours to get rid of this, you know, $60,000, $70,000 in credit card bills, yeah, you'll do it. But that's, you know, that's a big hit. That's a big hit. It's financial. It will affect your credit rating. You know, it's a problem. It's a really, really big problem. And again, this information can be used to, you know, for somebody to ingratiate themselves with you who you don't know, to then get themselves in a situation where they can do greater damage, etc. So it's important, you know, and I mention this because I often hear people say, oh, you know, who's interested in my account? I just had this conversation with somebody at work today, and I was explaining the same issue to them on a work basis, but, you know, it's true on personal accounts as well. Okay. So there are two very common ways of keeping your accounts and often devices secure. One is a PIN or password, okay? Now, a lot of security folks are not the biggest fans of PINs and passwords because they're relatively easy to hack, especially if you're talking about, say, remote access type of things. But at the end of the day, it's what we have. And what's important is to do your best to create as secure a PIN or password as you can. And try not to use a PIN or password as your only way to secure your accounts. And I'll discuss that piece of it shortly. But first, let me talk about what makes a good PIN or password. So for a PIN, two things. First of all, you want it to be a little bit on the long side. Okay, most devices and most accounts that allow you to use a PIN will often allow very short PINs, like 4 digits long. And in some situations, 4 digits is actually not so bad. Like if this is the PIN on your credit card that you have to manually, and this is only used, you know, when you're swiping for a card present type of transaction, 4 digits isn't so bad because, you know, there's still a number of different guesses it could be. And, you know, if you're in a store and you start trying one PIN after another, a third and a fourth, by the fourth time, any smart cashier is saying, you know, let me get my manager, right? Nevertheless, you want you're better off using a longer PIN, like a 6-digit PIN. And, you know, it doesn't sound like a big difference, but it really does, because with four digits, you have up to 9,999 possible combinations. If you have a 5-digit PIN, you have almost 100,000. And with a 6-digit PIN, you have almost 1 million possible combinations. In other words, each digit adds enough more combinations that it becomes that much harder for somebody to just guess or do what's called brute force. Brute force is just making a lot of guesses. Okay, so that works. So if you have a 6-digit PIN on a device, either on an account that you only access in person, right? Like I said, like a credit card in a store or something, six digits is fine, because the chance of somebody being able to guess your PIN are very low. And again, nobody is allowing anybody to go more than 2 or 3 attempts before calling a manager, before saying, you know, get it figured out or whatever. Okay. So that's, you know, for a PIN. But I will say 2 other things to keep in mind. You don't want a PIN to be just 4 or 6 of the same digit, and you don't want it to be 4 or 6 digits in a row. You don't want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, those are the things that if somebody's going to try to guess, those are the things that the first things that they are going to go for. Okay, so you really, really don't want to do that. You really, really don't want to do that, because that means that those are the first things that people are trying. So you have 6 digits. Okay, they're going to try 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 9, 0, and you know, you've already just tried. There aren't that many variations, even with a 6-digit PIN. Okay, and the same thing goes for 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, or 1, 1, 1, or 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. So, you know, if you use those are the ones that most guessers are going to try first, because those are the easy ones to try. Okay, so try to just use any other combination of numbers. In fact, there's some systems will not allow you to do that. They will not allow you to have multiple of the same number. They will not allow you to have the whole string in order. Okay, passwords are, you know, can be longer, and they should be longer, but they must be more complex, because 9 times out of 10, your password is going to be accessible in a context where a system can, you know, try to do a lot of what's called stuffing. They can try literally a million passwords in a very short amount of time. So you want to make your password, you know, fairly strong. So there are 2 pieces to making a password strong. One is the length. And again, every single additional letter or number in your password adds strength just by the nature of the fact that it's longer. So most security professionals will tell you at least 10 spaces long. Many systems will not call your password strong unless you're at least 12 spaces long. And again, if you do the math, you will see the number of possible combinations. The other thing that you want to avoid is using what's called a dictionary word, right? A real word that people use, or a real phrase that's commonly used. Because very often, and this is especially true if somebody has information about you. So say you use your 2 oldest children's names. Anybody who's going to be trying to do guessing is not just going to start with random combinations. Then you say, oh, who are this person's children? What are their birthdays? So if they're going to try, you know, if they're going to be guessing, they will have a computer, they will throw that information at the computer will create a list of all the combinations of your children's names, or, you know, many combinations of children's pairs of names, children and birthday, your birthday, you know, and that's what they're going to use to try to guess your password. So that becomes a bit of a problem. So what you but on the other hand, if you are keeping track of your own passwords, something that's relatively easy to remember and not too hard for you to type is important, because otherwise you wind up with a lot of typos. You don't remember, you make mistakes, and that becomes a problem, and that means you don't do strong passwords. So there are a number of ways to work around it. But again, if you're keeping track of your own password, a way to deal with it is to create one or two patterns of passwords that you use. And don't create one pattern, create a few patterns, 2 or even 3. And then for each thing, create it, and never ever reuse passwords. Because if somebody ever guesses your password, or your someplace that you have an account, your password got hacked, it's bad enough that they have your password in one place, but you may not know about that hack for, even if it's only a few days, right? Now they have your password. That's the first thing they're going to try in every other place that you have an account. So don't reuse passwords, but every time you go to make a new password, choose one of your 3 patterns and create a new password using that pattern. So what are some useful patterns? Okay, think of a phrase that you use, and in between the letters, in between the words, put in numbers and what's called special characters, like punctuation, the top row, the shift version of the top row, the number row on your keyboard, etc. So you might have the phrase early to bed, and in between, after early, you would have an ampersand, and after 2, you would have the number 6, and after bed, you would have a period. Okay, so that's one password. So again, you're not necessarily going to remember, but it's going to be easier to deal with something like that than just, a random string of numbers. Okay, then another password in that kind of pattern would be have a nice day. So you would say have with a capital H. Remember, uppercase and lowercase, most passwords tend to be case sensitive. So you say have a nice day. So your H would be capital. After have, you would have the number 9. After A, you would have a dollar sign. Not after nice, you would have 3, and day, you would have exclamation point, right? So it's a similar pattern, but totally different passwords. But because it's a certain pattern that you're using, it's easier for you when you give a look at it, when you type it in, etc., for you to work with. So that's one possible pattern. Another possible pattern is you start with a number or a special character, a phrase, and then 2 numbers. They're all different ways, or a phrase with a number in between, starting with a special character, a phrase with a number in between, and then a number at the end. And just, mix it up. Don't have the same pattern for everything. You have 2 of these patterns that themselves, like they're templates, that themselves lend themselves to many different variations. And you should be able to have a fairly wide variety of strong passwords that are not crazy making to remember. Because they're long and they have even though they kind of look like dictionary phrases, but there's enough of this other randomness, the occasional, maybe your pattern is where you put weird capitalizations or whatever it is, right? It gives enough randomness that it's going to really be very hard to guess. Okay, as long as you don't do something, again, obvious, like capital first kid's name, capital second kid's name, capital second kid, the capital third kid, capital third kid, capital first kid, right? If that's going to be your pattern, somebody's going to guess it. Okay, but if your pattern is a little bit, has a little bit more of these functions and features, and you use more than one pattern, you should have fairly strong passwords. Okay. The other thing that you really should think about is something called password manager. And there are many different password managers. And again, I'm not going to really get into products right now because, from one week to the next, this stuff changes. But the concept of password manager is that it allows you to create, whether you create your own passwords or even it creates a password for you, but it's strong, it's long, it's complex, and you don't have to remember the passwords. the password manager manages for you. And you have your one really strong master password that you enter to get to the password manager, and then it manages everything else. Now, a lot of security conscious people would like to have a password manager that stays on device, it's not on the cloud. And that can work, but it can get tricky, because if you access accounts on multiple devices, you run into a bit of a problem. So say I access my bank account on my phone and on my computer. Actually, so now my bank actually knows that I access from my phone and from my computer. Okay. It, made me identify my phone and my computer, but I don't remember the password, right? I don't want to remember the password, but I need to have the password manager both places. So it's possible to work around that. There are password managers that let you have your master password vault on, say, your computer, and then manually sync your phone and, say, your laptop or whatever to your master password vault. But honestly, for most people, I'm going to say go with the cloud-based password manager. And this is really important. You need to really go with a good service, because these guys need to keep these vaults really, really secure, and that's not cheap. Which means that you can get a free password manager, but the free ones are going to be limited. They'll only allow you to be on one device. They'll only allow you to do X many, passwords, whatever. And honestly, it's worth the yearly price if you pay. As I said, this is very expensive. If there is ever somebody who you want to keep your stuff secure, it's your password manager. So they need to make some money now, and they'll say, okay, we'll give people something because we'd like to help people, but we need to make good money. So they do this by their primary income being through accounts with big businesses. They have, the paid for versions or whatever. The free versions, if you're looking at a password manager that most of their accounts are free, I would be very worried, because either they can't afford to invest in the proper security that they need, or they're making money in a way that they're not telling you. And that is a problem, because then you are the product, which, so even if they're not actually selling your password information, they are they're tracking you, they're following you, they're digging up information that they're selling either to advertisers or to, all sorts of, not necessarily so savory people. So you're better off paying for your password manager. Okay. Again, you don't have to get a password manager, but it is a very worthwhile investment. Again, like antivirus, like a filter, it's worth the investment, because it's worth the investment in having good brakes in your car. It's worth the investment in making sure that your seatbelts and your the air cushion that comes out, the airbag is in working order in your car, that your seatbelts work, that your baby and toddler are in proper, car seats, safety seats, etc. These are basic safety things. And again, this is part of budgeting for your online life. Okay. It's really that simple. If you don't want to, if you could, if you're online, if you're listening to this, you are online, you have online accounts, you need to keep them protected. Again, you could just keep, your list of strong passwords, but for people who do things like banking, who do work related things in email, who have, portal access to medical records, credit card, accounts, whatever, it, more often than not, if you're, it's just it really, really is worth the investment. The other really, really big piece of security is what's called multi-factor or two-factor authentication. Now, two-factor authentication is a specific type of multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication means that you're authenticating, such as with a login and password, with more than one factor. Most commonly, you just have two. What do we mean by multi-factor? So two passwords is not really multi-factor authentication. Yes, it's harder for somebody to hack two passwords, but ultimately not that much, because if there's a database with people's passwords, all they need is to hack that one database, right? If they're getting into your list of passwords, so they found, instead of finding one password, they found two passwords. So for two-factor authentication to be necessary, to be useful, you need to have two different things. Typically we talk about something and something you have. Okay. So, and the idea is something is your password, which is, by the way, if you'll notice, a lot of companies do, for password reset, or, just as additional security, so-called, they'll ask you a secret question, etc. So just by the way, one really important thing with the secret question is don't actually provide real answers to the answer to the secret question, because, this quote unquote secret question, somebody who's been, paying attention can probably guess it. Like, oh, who was your first teacher? Well, if somebody knows where I went to school, who was my first grade teacher, they know who the first grade teachers were, when I was in first grade in Beis Rivka, or they can probably find out if they want to do a little digging. There you are. Where was my first, what was my first car? Whatever. People can figure out all of these questions. It's really not that hard. But if my answer to my first is to say, what was your first pet? I actually never had a pet, right? Which would never be my answer. What my answer to my first pet might be the blue dolphin from C.S. Lewis. Okay, that's actually not an answer I've used. But you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm using something that I totally made up. And how was somebody supposed to guess the thing that I made up? Unless I talk about, what I've been reading and what I've been using, what characters I've been using or whatever. But the blue dolphin from C.S. Lewis, kind of hard to find, figure that one out either, So if you're using random answers, so that makes those quote unquote secret questions a little bit more useful. But again, it's still two things that somebody has to figure out about you, and that's it. So it doesn't add as much security as it seems. Okay. So somebody just asked a really good question. What if you have trouble remembering those made up questions? It's the same thing like remembering those passwords. Okay, track them the same way. If I have to make a note of a password on a new site, I write down what was my secret question and what was the answer I made up, because I will not remember. And the better password managers actually allow you to track those secret questions as well, because it's the same idea. Okay, but that's the key thing. You need to keep track of those secret questions like they are a random password, because that's the only way they are going to be truly secure. They ask you what's your birthday, what was your first card, what was your first address, where did you meet your husband, where did you what was your first vacation. And it is shocking. We don't realize, especially in the age of social, not just social media, but a lot of our lives that, our private lives that are not so private, can be dug up, right? Because I don't keep a secret where I met my husband. Half the world knows. Half of my cohort knows where I met my husband. They know that I met my husband in Brooklyn. So if I were going to use the real answer to that question, all they need, it just takes a little bit of digging. Where was my first, which city was I born in again? Hello, that's just so easy to find out. So the only way to make these, like I said, I call them so-called secret questions because none of them are truly secret. Okay. So that's why it's really important. And the way to really deal with that is to track those answers, track the question and the answer the exact same way you track your passwords. Okay. So that's a really important thing. So what is a second factor? So one very common second factor is your phone number. And this, so you log into the site and they will either send you a text that you have to put the text into the thing, or they call you and you have to press, a button and everything is wonderful. Now, that's not terrible, but it is not a very good, it's not a good level of security. And I'm going to mention, for instance, at work, we have created a two-factor authentication system. One of our next big security projects is going to be getting rid of the ability to use a text or a phone call as a second factor. Why? Because there's something called SIM swapping. Okay, for most people, if you're getting text, that means it's going to your cell phone. Okay, it's really very easy for somebody to call your, it's very easy to find out your number. Then they call, say you're on T-Mobile. They call up T-Mobile and, say, oh, I am, Sasha Dvasha Yetzkowitz. And I have lost my phone and I'm so upset and I just ran and got a new phone. And could you help me? Could you transfer? And maybe the first, person is going to ask about those so-called secret questions. And maybe the second, service rep is going to ask about the other so-called secret questions, and maybe they don't have the answers or whatever. But either they'll hack that, or they'll eventually get to a customer service rep who's going to feel bad, and in defiance of, and by the way, I didn't only mean T-Mobile. This happens on every service, and that even is before the fact that there are those people who can be bribed, and this has happened. This has happened where there are people who have the access to do that stuff and they've been bribed and they get paid X amount per swap. And what basically happens is your number gets transferred to someone else's phone, and and they only need it for 5 minutes, right? Because they're going to do the swap at the moment that they are about to hack your account, log in with your password, and then do then get your, they just hack your, they will verify your login and password. Then they will do the swap. Then they will try to log in as you. It's going to ask to send them a text or, call them. They will say yes, get what they need, and then go ahead and do what they need to do. By the time you figure out, even if you figure out within 10 minutes that your phone got hijacked, they've already gotten into your accounts and are almost certainly already creating mayhem. Okay, they're going through other accounts, changing your passwords, et cetera, up and down the stack, basically. And in most cases, most of us will not know within 10 minutes that our phones got hacked. If I'm sitting and having a meeting with somebody with my phone on D&D for 45 minutes or an hour, of course I'm not getting any phone calls, not because my phone was hacked, but because I put my phone on D&D. Okay, and so even if I'm the kind of person that gets 20 bazillion calls an hour, I just put my phone on D&D. Because if I'm the kind of person who gets 20 gazillion calls an hour, I'm also probably the kind of person who has these meetings where I have to put my phone on D&D, right? Or if I'm deep in something, I might not get a phone call for an hour and a half, and I'm not paying attention because I'm busy with something. Then I'll pick up my phone to make a phone call and discover, oops, my phone's been hacked. Not my phone's been hacked, my number is not working. Then I have to find out what's going on. So, on a best case scenario, you're going to find out that your phone got swapped out not less than a half an hour before you know specifically what happened. And that is assuming that you find out right away that something is wrong. So if you have the choice to use either, if you have a smartphone, use your smartphone as your second factor authentication for everything else. Or you can use, there are these key fobs, which are, I will admit, they're a pain in the neck. lost a lot easier than a phone. But if you're a little concerned about that, if you have a keychain, if you don't lose your keys, then you can literally put those things on your key fob, on your keychain, and don't lose your keychain. Okay. So those two methods of two-factor authentication are far more useful. Now, there are some other types, but those are your most common methods. And I'm going to say, better use text and phone than nothing. But using an authenticator app or something like what's called a YubiKey is like a very common, is one of the most commonly known, best known makers of these fobs. Use one or the other. And if you're using, by the way, if you're using the app, there are two ways to do it. Either it can send you a code, which you then have to type in, or it will send what's called a push notification, where it's going to pop up on your phone and you have to say yes, accept it, or don't accept it. By preference, again, it's more secure to use the push notification, where it just asks you yes or no and tap it. Again, because what sometimes happens is there's certain types of attacks where you're not the one who's being attacked. The site is being attacked, and they've got somebody scooping everything up. And so they will grab what you're typing, and you think that you're typing stuff in, and they're grabbing it, and they're the one who's going in and typing it in. So you're not necessarily going to see what happens. You'll get an error message, whatever. Meantime, the hacker is in there. Whereas with the pop-up where it asks you, hey, is this you? Yeah, press the button. They cannot do that. So that is the more secure way. The most secure is the hardware key, but those tend to get lost. Most people don't really need that. But of the practical things, a smartphone app is, and I recommend either the Google app or the Microsoft app. There are others, but those are the two most common ones. They both work very, very well, very smoothly. You can use it with work accounts. You can work almost every account, every company that does two-factor authentication will work with them. So these are really very, very useful for this. If you don't have a smartphone and you really can't, do the key fob, okay, use the text, use the phone number. Not as secure, but it's still more secure than than nothing, basically. Now, I mentioned several times people finding out stuff about you, and this is really important. And I've discussed a little bit why you should worry about your privacy. So, part of it is simply, not everything about you needs to be open to the entire world. But the other piece of it is not just, just like you shouldn't be looking in other people's windows, your bedroom windows shouldn't be open either. And that's essentially, a little bit of discretion is a good thing. But also, again, part of the problem is that people can use that information against you. It's like if you're posting on Facebook in a very public forum about your vacation that you're going to be on next week. Now, some people who are watching this stuff, okay, you're not going to be home. And if you have in the past, posted pictures from your house that makes it look like you have a nice, luxurious house, somebody might decide, hey, this is a good opportunity to try to break in. So etc. So it's wise to keep your information to yourself. And again, there are also the other issues. If you have kids, by the way, they're going to have their own lives. Children are also can be very vulnerable if there's a lot of information about them. The younger the kid, the more this is an issue. People have been known to come, they know the kid's name, they know the kid's nickname. And they don't know it because they claim that they're your friend, and you just never met me, but I'm your mommy's good friend, or I'm your tati's good friend. Your tati told me to come get you from school, blah, blah. This is, by the way, not urban legend. This stuff really happens. And if you're like, all of your information is just out there for everybody to see, well, you've just given somebody, again, I'm not trying to scare people needlessly. It doesn't happen all that often. But again, a little bit of discretion and not, splattering all of your information out there is just a good way to, what's called, again, in security, we talk about attack surface. It's just a good way to keep the attack surface a little smoother so it's harder to get your hooks in, and a little smaller so there's not so much space for somebody to go tapping on. So, keep, if you're on social media, that's fine. But think about what you post, think about how you post, and like try to, and I'm going to do one more session on how to not so much keep those accounts secure, but how to keep your social media from splattering too much information, too much. Well, I was thinking, but the idea being not so much that this is going to be hacked, but you need to be cognizant of what is out there about you. Again, that's not the biggest problem, but it is something to be cognizant. The most important thing, like I said, is you need to keep your accounts from getting hacked. So you don't want that information out there. You want to have good, strong passwords that are not password 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9, password 1 2 3, your kid's name, your name and your birthday, your kid's name and your parents' birthday. These are such common passwords, and they're shockingly easy to guess. Strong passwords, two-factor authentication, and just, be very, very mindful about what it is you say and do in very public spaces. And social media, the last thing I will finish with for tonight is anything in email can easily be spread on. That is true 10 times over with social media. You post something, even in a friend group, okay, in a closed group, that can be posted. So, try to make sure that your closed friend group is trustworthy. So you're taking less of a risk. The more open your friend group is, the lower your walls are, the more careful you have to be. I personally do not ever post anything on Facebook that I would worry about my mother, my in-laws, my boss, and my boss's funders should see, basically, even when it's in closed groups and when it's in friend groups, whatever, because they've gotten better over the last 5 years, but stuff happens, people post stuff, people screenshot stuff all over the place. You've all seen the WhatsApps that are a screen grab of somebody's Twitter or somebody's Facebook post or whatever. So don't ever think that, oh, it's a closed group, I can say whatever I want, because no, you can't. If it's something that could create problems for you or somebody else, think twice and 3 times, whether whether the risk, which maybe, the more closed the group is, the lower the risk is, but the higher the negative potential fallout, the more thoughtful you should be, even in supposedly closed groups and on WhatsApp, etc. And with that, any questions? Okay, so I will stop recording. Okay, recording is ended. If somebody has a question that you would like to ask that is not recorded. Okay, so in that case, a very good night, and I will be Next week will be our last session on a little bit more on privacy and misinformation and disinformation and why you should care about both. We've talked a little bit about the privacy aspect, but the misinformation, disinformation is kind of important because fraudsters use that stuff to try to get stuff out of you that you aren't necessarily interested in giving them. So have a good night to all.